What's going on, boys? It is day number 21 of reading through the book of Deuteronomy. We are officially 3 weeks into reading the book of Deuteronomy. I just want to give a big thank you to everybody who's been watching since the beginning of this series, or if you've been watching even beforehand. We have been doing, we've been doing these videos for, I can't even tell you how long now. It's been, 6.5 months. Started these back in February. So if you've been watching since then, kudos to you. So today we're looking at a pretty short chapter, but this chapter is going to actually be broken up into a couple of sections. But there's only one section that I particularly highlighted that I felt a calling to me. These other sections were a little bit kind of hard to, comprehend. And as you might could tell, we are kind of looking at this portion of the Old Testament about these kind of laws that are being put into place for the Israelites about this land that they have received. And so the first section is titled Atonement for an Unsolved Murder. So back in the old days, there was constantly just a lot of action happening. And, if for some reason a murder would take place, it talks about in this first section that, if a body was basically found out in a field that was a murdered body, there was really no way to kind of like trace who did it. There wasn't, fingerprint tracking last time. There's not DNA testing at this time. So they don't have a way of tracking the murderer down. So they would actually have some of the priests come in and they would go to the nearest town and they would go and they would kind of, say, hey, let's figure out who did this, because, the murderer couldn't have gotten far because there's no vehicles. So it's not like they can get in the car and drive away. But what's interesting is the section that I highlighted, verses 7 through 9, which says, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done, except this atonement for your people, Israel, whom you have redeemed, Lord, and do not hold your people guilty of the blood of an innocent person. The bloodshed will be atoned for, and you will have purged yourselves from the guilt of shedding innocent blood, since you have done what is right in the eyes of the Lord. So, if you're a little confused on what exactly is taking place here, so, these murders, again, are sometimes, unsolved, and they don't know who did it, so they're trying to figure it out. And so the biggest thing is, what would they do with that body? Because, the only way that sins were atoned for, had this blood that was shed out. But this isn't innocent blood. This is, a blood that is, of a person who has done wrongs. And this person who didn't deserve to die, but was killed by someone who was probably corrupt by an evil spirit. And so this person was not a sacrificial atonement to God. And so God would see this, and this would basically create a curse for anybody that stepped near it. And so what they would do is they say, hey, look, God, we're coming here. We're trying to figure this out. This is not, we're not ignoring this. We're not just walking over this body and say, oh, look at him. He's gone. Like, no, we're looking and say, oh my gosh, like this innocent person was killed. And the word innocent is kind of a tough word to use, because we hear the word innocent, we think, oh, well, this person just lived a perfect life. Like, no, we use the word innocent because, they may have lived a great life. There's a difference between someone living a great life and someone living a perfect life. It is possible to live a great life. To live a perfect life, that's impossible. We cannot live a perfect life. But living a great life, that's, I think, where we kind of get that affiliation with the word innocent here. And so, accidental murders would happen, and they must be dealt with in the proper manner. It even talks about later near the end where they would have to, if these bodies were found, there's a different, that's a different kind of, like murder scene that happens at the end, where it says if these bodies were left out in the open in public, they would have to be buried the same day. Just as a kind of way to kind of make sure that, they're not stumbled upon and that nobody gets cursed by it. And then most importantly, addressing to the Lord what was done and move forward. So addressing to the Lord every step you took to kind of clarify, like, look, Lord, this is what I came across, this is what I did, and here's how I'm going to move forward. So it's just a very interesting way that, this atonement is described. But that's I guess how they did it back then. Obviously now with, if a murder takes place, we have a lot more, you know, tools that we can use to kind of clarify this. So, we don't have to, do these kind of things that they did in the Old Testament anymore. So like I said, this whole chapter is broken up into multiple sections, and the second one is called marrying a captive woman. So to kind of summarize what this section talks about, it kind of means that, after God has given you this land, if you see a attractive woman that, you find comforting to you, basically, this woman would come into the man's life. And let me just clarify here that, when she came in, that she would have to have her nails trimmed, her head shaved, her clothes changed. And, I can just imagine that, any woman out there that, maybe watching this, or, for guys thinking about this, I don't think they would want that. But this is what they would do, is that, and if she was the right one for him, she would stay with him. But if she wasn't, then he would let her go. So I think, just the word captive, marrying somebody who is going to be loyal to you, who is going to be by your side 24/7. And sometimes, our eyes play tricks on us, and our emotions play tricks on us, and we think, oh, well, that's the right person. But in reality, when, you break it down, you're like, I was thinking about this just a second ago, but I'm reading this book called Wild at Heart by John Elder. It's a really great book. And he was talking about how, an encounter he had with one of his clients was about this guy who was, talking about, him being attracted to younger women. And he talked about how these, a lot of, features that women have, most women have, is their makeup, which makes them appear more like, clear and fresh. But the fact is that, when they took their makeup off, she's just an ordinary woman. And so he wouldn't be attracted to that anymore. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that, you don't really know if someone's right for you until you get to know them personally. So their physical features may look great, and they may have like the most pretty face, but that could just be a mask. You don't know that. So you have to be careful. And this kind of, ties into this next section, talking about the right of the firstborn. So it's talking about how, if a man were to have two wives and he loves one more than the other, but the one he doesn't love has a child first, that this man would have to basically give all of his priorities to that son, because he is the firstborn son. As most of us might know, if you are the firstborn in your family, or if you have a child that is a firstborn, that firstborn is, the one that's probably the most important, not because, they're the oldest and they're the most, mature, but they're the ones that, are the first of your family. They're the first of your creation. So you're going to do everything you can to make sure that they, get all of your attention. I am a firstborn in my family. And I can tell you that one of the great things about being a firstborn is not necessarily that, I had the opportunity to receive a lot of lessons, really from like my father, but I also had the opportunity to be a guide to my siblings, and, try to be a guide to the ones around me. The firstborn is always the one that, has to take a lot of the most responsibility, is always the one that has to, really step up to the plate and just, swing for the fences, because if they don't, it's not going to be well for the ones that come after. And so I think this kind of ties into this next section, talking about a rebellious son, that if, a son is not respecting their parents, it talks about in this section, they would basically essentially have their son stoned by the priest. So glad we don't do that anymore. But I think one thing we look at is, there's always going to come times when, whether if you have your own kids or if you know somebody else that has kids, there's going to be always times where they're always going to try and question you and act like they're rebelling against you. But that's just because they're learning. There's a famous saying that I've heard before: there's no such thing as a bad student, but a bad teacher. So it maybe just come down to the parenting, come down to, what's going on, who is he learning from? Who is raising him? And maybe that has to be changed. But we also have to remember that, we take the value, we take the lessons, and we take the kind of lifestyle from the people that we grow up around. So the question you have to ask yourself is, well, who am I around? Who is my inspiration? What am I growing by? What is my encouragement? Who can I trust? Who can I ask questions? And I think you'll know. And so that's where we're going to end off today. This section has been very tough for me. I think just this whole series, especially, in this whole book, talking about the laws. The Old Testament is just a tough section of its own. But just remember that, we know that there are constantly lessons being taught to us through these pieces of scripture about how to live our lives, whether it's to obey our families, obey God's command, but most importantly, love and trust God with all our heart, mind, and soul. I'm going to go ahead and jump into today's daily prayer, and then we will end it off there. We are on August 22nd. Today's title is called Right Pursuits, and today's verse connected to it is Psalm chapter 37, verse 4, which says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." Why do I pursue things that are dead and lifeless when I have you, God? What is it about man that makes him so restless and disruptive? Why does my heart flutter for empty things that hold no promise and have no lasting impact? Give me your passion, Jesus. Fill me with your spirit. Invigorate my life and drive me forward to do things that please you. Help me to find out what pleases you. Expose the worthless things in my life and help me extract the precious. I want to live for you and take delight in you alone. So we have to step foot into the life of Jesus, and it is a very tough thing. I wish I could tell you that it was easy, but it is not. It is a very complex process. Another thing that I learned from reading The Wild at Heart by John Eldredge is that, just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean that all my problems are solved. I still face things daily. I still struggle with sins and temptations of all sorts. But what's great about it is that you do realize that you have help. That when before you're saved, before you accept Jesus, you think there's no way out. You think that you're the only one struggling. But when you become a follower and you believe in Jesus, you realize that everybody is struggling. Even the people who you seem like they're succeeding the most, who have the most money, who are the most popular, think of the most popular athlete or actor out there, they struggle. All of them do. So just because they seem like they have their life together, they have all this money, they have these big families, just know that everybody struggles. Everybody does. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a way of life. That's the way of this world. And there's really nothing that we can do about it besides turning to Christ and understanding that he's taking care of all of it for us. All we have to do is accept and live it out in this life. And then we will receive the goodness in eternity afterwards. That is today's word. I hope you guys have had a great week, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will see you guys tomorrow. Peace out, boys.